G.I. Joe!
The 80s gave us many weird cartoon shows, but G.I. Joe was actually supposed to be the normal one. Yeah, because first of all, it's about an elite team of special ops commandos who are supposed to fight crime and corruption, which is exactly how the cartoon shows started out. But then the creators kept piling on more and more characters, so whenever they ran out of ideas, things got interesting. And that's how we got an elite army squad fighting a criminal mastermind who is literally a human and snake hybrid. Well, in today's video, I'm not just going to talk about Cobra's supreme leader Serpentor, but 10 such equally weird characters that had us like, hold on, we're still watching G.I. Joe, right? So without further ado, let's get started.
I shall take precautions. Organisms of Cobra-La?
Golobulus. Golobulus is the perfect example of how exactly G.I. Joe drifted from its initial seriousness as a military-based cartoon show, because earlier, Cobra was just an evil terrorist organization led by an extremist with a metal mask, until Serpentor and eventually Golobulus entered the lore with their ancient civilization, Cobra-La. I mean, the pitch must have been pretty wild, right? How about we keep the military action, but also throw in some immortal snake men from a prehistoric time? And no one in the room said no, apparently. Golobulus doesn't walk because he's only a human up to the waistline, from where a giant snake tail is attached to his body, and with that thing he floats because walking or slithering is too overrated for this guy. He first appeared in the 1987 movie G.I. Joe the movie, basically as the ruler of an ancient civilization called Cobra-La, which was built around 40,000 years ago. They did various experiments on biotechnology until the Ice Age happened, which forced them into hiding underneath the Himalayas. Golobulus was gigantic, but his brain was way more powerful and scary than his body, which was made of half cybernetics and mostly crustacean-like mass that also covered his right eye, giving him a pirate kind of sinister look. However, in the 1987 movie, he brought the ultimate twist in the story. Cobra Commander, the guy who intimidated us all along, was actually a part of his plan. Golobulus once brought a nobleman from the Cobra-La community and transformed him into this masked villain, who seemed to be very promising for world dominance at that time. But as the centuries passed, he failed Golobulus after being defeated by G.I. Joe multiple times. So Golobulus came up with his plan B, which was creating Serpentor through manipulating Mindbender's visions, but Serpentor also failed him big time. Now, this frustrated snake guy Golobulus wanted to grab a BET device to activate pods with mutative spores. His ultimate goal went beyond the bars of war and terrorist missions, as he wanted to rewrite human evolution by pushing it back to its primitive state. But he was finally defeated by Duke and Sergeant Slaughter, assisted by Lieutenant Falcon, who overloaded the BET that destroyed the pods and eventually the protective dome of Cobra-La. Golobulus escaped like a thief, but then we never came to know where he ended up. G.I. Joe creator Larry Hama himself wasn't very fond of that character, but Skybound Entertainment published comic books where they once again featured Cobra-La and their weird-ass leader Golobulus. Nemesis Enforcer. Loyal to Golobulus and hateful towards humanity, the next one is Nemesis Enforcer, who in my opinion was the scariest and the weirdest character in the 1987 G.I. Joe movie, where traditional military-style fights got too boring for Hasbro, as they're thinking about bringing in new merchandise of some myth-inspired characters. And maybe that's why, when they're designing the characters, someone in the room got a little carried away and added giant bat wings on a Cobra soldier. And we finally got Nemesis Enforcer. Bone-like spikes covered his wings, while his clawed limbs gave him a pretty terrifying look. He was the personal bodyguard to a leader like Golobulus, so every appearance was meant to be deadly for the Joes. He never talked much, but rather growled like a predatory beast, making him a pretty tough guy for a merely human Joe officer to fight with. But I think he was one of those characters who made Cobra-La feel like a totally otherworldly ecosystem that didn't even belong to Earth. So at the end, G.I. Joes made sure that they wouldn't exist anymore. After a terrible fight, eventually Cobra-La collapsed, taking Nemesis along, and since then, Just like Golobulus, Nemesis also disappeared from the animation. What I find the most ridiculously weird about him is that there was no reason for him to exist in something like G.I. Joe, but he still did, and that too, soaring across the sky with those giant wings, as if someone just ordered a mythical creature in a gunfight. But that's the ultimate craziness and purity of 80s cartoon show, especially G.I. Joe, which was mostly designed to sell action figures. So if that giant winged assassin helped the sale, then by all means, deploy the Enforcer.
Won't be necessary.
Pythona. So our next Cobra-La weirdo, Pythona, popped into the story right at that moment when we started thinking of Cobra as a predictable enemy. Pythona came in and changed the whole vibe around this terrorist organization. She's the deadliest assassin with snake-like eyes, a body built of bioorganic energy, and razor-sharp claws that spurt acidic fluid. The most important thing you must remember about her is that the weapons she used were all living beings, or the mutated versions of some ancient creatures. The first time she appeared with her gang was in the 1987 movie, transforming the show's military-based adventures into supernatural mystery. Wearing a tattooed hooded cloak, she infiltrated the terror dome of Cobra with her bioweapons and changed her shape as a trickster to mess with the Cobra soldiers. She then finally reached the throne of Serpentor, revealing herself as the loyalist of Cobra-La Emperor Golobulus. She also revealed that behind Serpentor's existence, the real mastermind was Golobulus and his 40,000-year-old civilization called Cobra-La. Just like Nemesis Enforcer, Pythona's look was supposed to give him a dark fantasy mythological creature vibe, but she was still pretty attractive in her rockstar style attire, which was a bioorganic skin, by the way. But no matter how many creative arguments they went through for this mythological setup, they made each new character hella scary, and Pythona was hands down the most uniquely portrayed trickster in the movie, even exceeding Baroness and Zorana in terms of maliciousness. She was one of the efficient employees of Golobulus, and that's why she was tasked to steal the bet for Golobulus, because her shape-shifting abilities always came in handy for the Cobra-La mission. However, just like her colleagues in the Cobra-La, she wasn't explicitly killed or kicked out. But yeah, she too disappeared from the animation, just like the previous two I talked about. Although later G.I. Joe comics brought her back as a part of many dangerous operations conducted by Golobulus.
Yes, leadership is at the very heart of this matter.
Serpentor. Cobra Commander stopped being scary after his repeated failures to defeat the G.I. Joes, and maybe, apart from the audience, the creators themselves got tired of dealing with an incompetent terrorist leader. The dilemma was epic because they could not let the heroes die on the battlefield, especially in a kids show. But at the same time, Cobra Commander became too predictable, even for the kid. In every G.I. Joe episode, Cobra Commander plots a scheme which is definitely not going to work on the Joes. So to avoid these overused tropes in almost each of the episodes, they came up with a new villain whom you can't just hire as a CEO, because you gotta assemble him genetically. And that's how Serpentor was born as a crazy idea, which finally came to life in the 5-episode miniseries called Arise Serpentor Arise, Season 2 of the G.I. Joe series. Dr. Mindbender, who was equally frustrated with this blowhard Cobra Commander's empty threats, had a vision of a new Supreme Emperor to rule their gang. But this person would be a lab experiment result more than just a walk-in candidate. So, according to the vision, Mindbender, along with Baroness and Destro, gathered the DNAs of all the legendary conquerors from all over the world, like Julius Caesar, Genghis Khan, Napoleon, and many more. And mixing it all up, they created the new Cobra leader, Serpentor. Now, he looked more like an Aztec warlord than an American terrorist. His snake-like scale-patterned uniform, snake-like pauldrons, and a cobra hood made him look like a part-time cosplay artist who is really, really angry at the world. But Serpentor was nothing less than Cobra Commander. He was an even more aggressive and old-school grump who used phrases like, "This I command." So usually his extreme dominance pushed him into major fights with Cobra Commander, who couldn't even stand him for a second. For a genetic chimera like Serpentor, it's quite common to die and get resurrected multiple times. But the weirdest and most G.I. Joe thing that happened to him was Cobra Commander turning him into an iguana. And it was quite a big reason for embarrassment for a Supreme Emperor like Serpentor.
We are disappointed.
You were expected.
Cobra Commander. No matter how many Snake guys entered the G.I. Joe series to become the boss villain, I think most of us would still consider Cobra Commander as the main face of the Cobra Gang. With that metal mask and a constant aggression in his voice, he was more than just intimidating. But the weirdest thing about him is that when an extended lore of Cobra-La was introduced, it just diminished Cobra Commander's character as a menacing villain. After so many failures to spread their evil influence on the world, when Serpentor arrived, Cobra Commander got even more erratic, like a mad bull. Then something happened when Golobulus claimed himself to be the godfather of Cobra Gang. Golobulus brought him inside the hidden dome of terror and gave him the ultimate punishment for not being a competent leader for all these years. And the punishment was biogenetic transformation. He was exposed to these mutative spores in a pod and got transformed into a snake. But even after that, he could talk and still complain like he used to. Nothing really changed except for the fact that a terrorist leader has all of a sudden turned into a snake. But Baroness came to the rescue in the miniseries called Operation Dragonfire, where, with the help of an ancient technology of Dragonfire, she helped him to get back into his fully human form. But Cobra Commander was not someone to mess with. So right after getting back to his form, he took his revenge on Serpentor. Using the same old technology of biogenetic transmutation, he turned the Emperor into an iguana, whom he kept and exploited like a pet, but he never really liked. Dr. Mindbender. Well, the next one is the mad scientist of this universe, and typically the Lex Luthor of the G.I. Joe series, who pushed the entire terrorist group of Cobra into a biogenetic madness. Appearing in the Arise Serpentor Arise miniseries for the first time, Mindbender became the brains behind creating a Supreme Emperor Serpentor. But as I said, it was Golobulus pulling the strings all along. Back in that time, Mindbender thought himself to be the Einstein of erratic science inventions. Initially, Mindbender used to be a dentist called Dr. Brian Bender, who created a brainwave stimulating machine that was supposed to reduce dental pain. But the self-experiment failed and literally twisted his brain, turning his scientific mind into a corrupted one. You can find him shirtless all the time, with just purple pants. He's a baldy, but a muscular one, with a single monocle in his eye, giving him a pretty wise dominatrix look that kids of the time didn't even understand properly. Anyways, even after creating Serpentor as well as the battle android troopers, he was considered as a traitor and locked inside a freighter beneath a volcano, which killed him eventually. But then again, Cobra Commander resurrected him through biogenetic technology because, no one really dies in a G.I. Joe comic line where death of a character can risk the sale of their toys in the real world. Fatal Fluffies. Cute teddy bear-like mascots suddenly turning into a massive horned creature with guns is probably the worst nightmare. And yes, to exactly induce this kind of nightmare, Hasbro came up with these really cute creatures called Fatal Fluffies, which were mainly a Cobra setup to distract the Joe officers from their worldwide mission. They first appeared in the 1985 G.I. Joe miniseries Pyramid of Darkness, where Cobra unleashed this gang of Fluffies into a space station called Delta, occupied by the Joes. First, it seemed like gifts for the Joes, who got really distracted by their cuteness. But right after entering the base, they revealed their true form as terrifying assassins. Hasbro brought them into the lore because their primary objective was to sell toys that looked like Ewoks, which got famous after Return of the Jedi. Although Ewoks eventually inspired the Dreadnoks, Larry Hama didn't like the idea of killing teddy bears in a kids show, which was honestly an insane idea for a show like G.I. Joe. And that's why they gave the Fluffies the most terrifying transformation we ever saw in this cartoon show.
His mission is complete! Now he shoots!
Big Lob. I think I've talked enough about a winged creature, some weird-looking snake man, and a mad scientist who created a human from scratch. So now it's time I talk about the most normal-looking character in the lore, but he's still the weirdest one. So the one I'm talking about is Bradley Big Lob Sanders, an elite athlete and one of the trainees from Rawhides, a group of young soldiers under the supervision of beachheads. We saw Rawhides for the first time in the 1987 movie, where they're trained by the G.I. Joe officers. Apart from Lob, we have many other famous characters from the group, such as Lieutenant Falcon, Chuckles, Jinx, Law and Order, and Tunnel Rat. But Lob's weirdness beat them all. The guy talks in sports, literally sounding like a sports commentator, although he chose army training over a traditional sport. But the problem is he thinks every mission is a game of basketball, and he treats it like one. Throughout the movie, his style remained consistent, and it really made his character stand apart from the rest. But back then, he didn't get any merchandise figure of his own. Although much later, the modern collectors got a premium figure of Big Lob, finally giving him the reputation he deserved all along.
Shipwreck! Over here!
Mara. The blue-skinned Mara first appeared in Season 1, Episode 45, titled Memories of Mara. A 20-minute-long episode aired in 1985. We all knew her as the Cobra operative, but then her story got really pathetic. The Cobra leaders did many biogenic experiments on humans, and one of those experiments to create an aquatic squad working for them was done on Mara that permanently turned her skin blue and gave her a lifelong curse of not being able to live without water. This messed with her life for good, and eventually forced her to turn against Cobra. But you know, it's really hard to turn on a powerful gang like them, so Shipwreck, one of the G.I.Joe officers, helped her in this situation. However, the story ended with these two parting with their ways because Shipwreck and Mara lived in two different worlds. So Mara dived back into the water, bidding her final goodbye to Shipwreck. She went on to live with her people in the sea, and that's it. Her story ended right in that episode. But you won't believe that it was really not her last appearance in G.I. Joe, because in the two-part Season 2 episode, There's No Place Like Springfield, she once again appeared in Shipwreck's dreams, where she was cured from this condition with the help of G.I. Joe medic Doc. And I think that was such a sweet and respectful way to end her arc in the story.
We've caged quite a bird, Xamot.
Yes, Tomax. Now let's take
Tomax and Xamot. To end the list full of these craziest characters from the show, I will talk about these two twin characters, who are the reflection of each other and hence the name. Tomax and Xamot, who were also known as the Crimson Twins, the founding members of Cobra's elite team, Crimson Guards. They first appeared in the lore through the 1985 miniseries Pyramid of Darkness as the high-ranking members of Cobra, and basically as the two lead members of a multinational corporation called Extensive Enterprises. Now, if you ain't twins like these two, there's no point in having a twin brother, because these two share an uncanny psychic bond, which means if you hurt Tomax, it would hurt his twin brother as well on the same level of intensity. They're extremely identical with only one distinction, which is a scar on their face. But the weird part is that Tomax has that scar on the right side of his face, while Xamot has it on his left side, which makes sense because they're literally each other's reflections. They're immensely wealthy and powerful, always wearing suits and having bad ideas in their minds. Also, they're the upper hands because most of the Cobra operations and weaponry were actually funded by Extensive Enterprises, led by these two hella creepy twins, sometimes known as the money men of the show. And that's it, guys. I know there are some predictable names that you could have sensed from a mile away, but without mentioning them, the list would have been incomplete. On that note, this video is over. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. Also, let us know in the comments which character you think is the weirdest from the lore. Until then, goodbye and see you in the next one.